Hello and welcome back to Tech Art for All. I'm really glad to see that you guys are back. We're about to embark on Lesson 8. There's a lot that we already covered. In the last lesson, we started writing our first mail script together. So you guys should have all the building blocks of a mail script and know how to use them and know how to find help. And today I thought it would be a good idea to cover uh, the top four commands for finding nodes inside your scene. And I'm going to switch to my desktop really quick. And over here, I already have commented out four different commands. The first command is ls. We went over the ls command in the last video. The next command is list relatives. And then there's list connections and list history. So let's go through each command and see how to use it and why it's super handy commands to know. So I'm going to go back to, let's start out with ls command, and I'm going to go back to our browser, go to my command documentation, and we're going to start out with ls. Let's type ls, let's find ls in the list. Okay, and so ls command, it's the command that that lets you list nodes. You can list all nodes, you can list selected nodes. So if you select some nodes and you want to know what they are, when you list selected nodes, it will actually return them in the order that they were selected, which is really handy. There's a lot of options here. One of the options that I would recommend, so to let's see where selection is. So if you want to list selection or selected nodes, you do -sl or -selection. So for each of the flags, you can use the long version or the short version. I think as you're learning, I would recommend using the long version because it's going to help you remember what the flag means. As you get more experienced, and especially if you're writing scripts for yourself, you can start using the short versions. And but I think it's always nice to be verbose when possible, because you never know, especially if it's a very obscure flag, you never know when the next person to look at your script will be completely confused, and then they have to go back to the documentation to understand what the flag means. A lot of times when Maya runs a command, it uses the short flag names, so that is usually the time to go to documentation and see what the flag means. So let's try to grab the selection. Let's see how that works. So you can see that it's the SL flag or selection flag. So let's type, let's go back here and let's say select the, oh, why isn't it selecting? Okay, select the perspective camera. So now, or let's do perspective and top, just so we have two things. So now, you remember I selected perspective first, then I selected the top, and we're just going to do ls-sl. That's it. We're going to run that, and you can see that it returned persp and top. And you can kind of see that it's in the order that I selected. If I select top first and then shift select persp, it should do it backwards. Now top persp. So this is super handy if you want to write a script that takes some information from the first selected node and puts it on the second selected node. This is how you would do it. Inside of documentation, there's I would recommend reading through all the options. There's some options that you're going to almost never use, and other options that are super handy. For example, one thing to remember is if you're using my references, don't forget about the recursive flag. This is the thing that's gonna make the ls command work on referenced nodes as well. It's not super obvious in the beginning, so that's why I recommend remembering that. Just recursive makes it return referenced objects as well. There is, the flattened flag is kind of cool. If you select vertices or components, it will, instead of telling you like, oh, you selected component 0 through 1000, it will actually give you each individual component, which is necessary sometimes. There's other ways of getting that information as well. You can say, hey, list all textures or sets, or there's a lot of different options. So definitely go through all of these. Most of the time, you're going to be using ls select, which returns the selection. That's probably the handiest flag on this command. There's another cool trick you can do is you can, a lot of times if you want to, let's say, return all the nodes that have a particular attribute, what you can do, this is not super obvious from documentation, and not a lot of people know about this, but let's say if you want to list all the objects that have a particular attribute, you say star, in quotes you put star, dot, and then the attribute name. For example, tx, which is translate x. So if I run that, it will return every transform. And as you can see, it returns it with the attribute, which is kind of nice. If you want to return only the object without the transform, you just do -o. So now when I run it, it will just give me the object. So this is a really nice shorthand way to get attributes. A lot of people, they'll list all the objects and then they'll write a loop and they'll loop through each object and do another command that tells them if the attribute exists on that node, which is obj exists or attribute exists. So well, this is the way where you let the command internally give you the information that you need, so you don't have to iterate it inside of Mel. So yeah, anyway, just remember that ls sl is going to be used a whole lot. Next command is called list relatives, and what list relatives does is it lets you query if the current node has any children or nodes parented to it, or also find out what its parent is. So for example, if hopefully everybody knows that every shape node inside of Maya must have a transform, and normally you just see the transform, you don't see the shapes. So to see the shapes, you have to click here under display shapes, and now all of a sudden these little expandable pluses come up, and you click on them and then you can see the shape. So normally you don't see it, but it's something that should be familiar to you, the fact that there's shapes and transforms. So for example, if you have the transform, which is in this case persp, and you want to find out what's the node, that the shape node that's parented to it, you can say, so we'll use LSSL to capture the persp into a variable first. So we'll say string. So ls selected, you have to assume that it will return a string array, because it's usually multiple objects that it returns. And even if it's one object, it still will be an array. It will just have one element in it. So I'll say selection equals, we use the diagonal single quote character that's below the escape key, and we'll type ls selected semicolon. So this, oh, and of course I forgot to put the square brackets to denote that it's an array, string array. Run that, and we get one, an array with one item, which is persp, perfect. But now we want to find out, hey, what's this shape node that's underneath persp? We'll say string shape equals, I believe this also returns an array. We'll do the single quote again. And then we'll say list relatives. And it's nice, as soon as you tap up a command that actually exists, Maya makes it blue, which kind of tells you that everything's working as expected. Let me just turn off this phone call really quick. List relatives, and we'll say -s for shape. Let's look at the documentation really quick. I know this by heart, but let's type list relatives. And we can say, see, shapes is -s. List all children of this DAG node that are shapes. Perfect, that's exactly what we need. And then we feed it the actual DAG node. And of course, you know, because this is an array, normally you have a lot of items, and if you want to only get the shape for the first item, you have to enter 0. 0 denotes, in this case, the first element in the array, which is going to be persp. So we run that together. And you can see the result is persp shape. Persp shape. So all of a sudden you have a way to get information beyond your current selection. Same thing goes for if you, one thing that's very, very important for list relatives command is you always, okay, not always, but 99.9% of the time you want to use the -f flag. And what that means is, let's look, it means full path. So Maya, because you can have multiple nodes that have the same names, Maya uses paths to distinguish between two nodes that have the same name. And so the list relatives command automatically gives you the short name, which is just like the name of the node. But the problem is that if you have a complicated scene, more often than not, you'll have nodes that have the same names. And if you have two nodes that have the same name and you try to access information by that short name, you'll error out. It will say like, oh, there's two nodes with the same name. I don't know which one you wanna get information for. So the -f flag basically assures or makes sure that you're always getting the full path to the nodes, and that way your node paths are all unique and you won't run into that situation. So 9 out of 10 times if you have an error after using list relatives, it's because you forgot the -f. So something to keep a note of. So similarly, if I select the persp shape, which is the child of persp, and I want to find out, hey, what's the parent of this shape node? It's a shape node, but it's got to have a parent. It's got to have a transform. So let's copy this, and we'll do the opposite, the inverse, looking up at the parent. So we're going to select the child. We're going to put it inside of selection. And then instead of shape, we're going to say P for parent. What's the parent for? And then we'll call this parent, just to make it clear. And then we'll find out what's the parent, and it says persp. And in fact, here you can see the little pipe character. It just means that persp, because there's nothing before the pipe, it means that persp is parented to the origin or the world of the scene, or to the root of the scene. So the world is the parent. But now if I go back to this one, you'll see the full path. You see how it says persp, that's the parent, and then persp shape. So this is the unique path of this particular node. So that's list relatives. Very, very handy. If you look at the documentation, there's a lot of really cool flags. You can say node type, like if the transform has multiple children, you can identify only a particular type. You can say all descendants. So like if you have a hierarchy of nodes and you select the top group, you can get all the children of that group. Super, super handy. So the next one is list connections. And this one allows you to identify nodes that are connected to a node that you currently have in your possession. So for example, if I'm gonna make a polygon sphere with history, right? So this node currently has construction history, and if we look at the node editor, hopefully you're all familiar with the node editor, it's super handy. We can see that this is currently the kind of the network that builds the sphere. You have the polysphere node that defines the shape, and that's connected to the mesh. This is the thing that allows you to change how many subdivisions it has on different axes and radius and all that stuff. So it's kind of like the building blocks, or the formula that defines the shape. So for example, if I have p-sphere shape 1 selected, let's grab that. selection. I'm copying and pasting the code from the previous examples. So I got p-sphere shape, and I want to know, hey, is there another node connected to p-sphere shape? You can say string, and all of these are more are going to return arrays, string arrays. Connected nodes, or yeah, nodes. List connections. And then I'm gonna give it that same first element. Oh, of course I forgot. See? Same mistake over and over again. So I forgot to make it an array. I have to change the name now, I think. I'm just gonna call it connect nodes. And so right away it tells you like, hey, there's initial shading group and polysphere 1 connected, and here's the initial shading group and polysphere 1. So if you look at the documentation for list connections, you can see that you can actually specify whether you only want to list connections that are incoming connections, or if you want to specify outgoing connections by the source or destination flag. You can also specify if you want to get plugs, which is the node plus the attribute. And then you can also specify what type of nodes that you're interested in. So super handy to practice with the different flags. And then the last but not least is the list history command. This is super useful if you want to get, so list connections will only give you like the immediate connections to the node, but if you want to get like all the nodes that are involved in the creation process of your currently selected node, you would use list history, and that will the breadth of that will just go on forever or as specified. So let's again, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add an operation like a mesh smoothing or something, mesh smooth. And so you can see that now it added another node in the history, which is smooth face 1. And I can say, hey, instead of just giving me the connections, the immediate connections, I can say give me all the connections, and let's get the selection. And now I'm going to say, copy this. Oh, what happened there? I'm going to say history. I'm going to say list history. Let's do that. Let's do that. And you can see that it now gives me the whole shabazam, not just the immediate nodes, but it will say p-sphere shape 1, which is this guy. Oops. Let me grab the output really quick. Where is it? So this is what it gave me. It gave me this guy, which is this guy. It gave me polysmorph smooth face 1, which is this guy, and polysphere, which is this guy. So it didn't give me this guy because if you look at the help for list history, you can actually get the future as well. So because by default it gets history, which is the things in the kind of that are leading up to the node. But if you want to get future, which is the nodes after the current node, you use the future command or future flag. So once again, look at all these cool options that you have to play with these commands, and you know, once you know how to use these guys, you're going to be in really good shape. So I hope you know, you guys keep practicing, and I hope you're enjoying these videos, and thanks again for joining me. Hope you have a nice day.